Chapter 4. New Owners. Earl Smythe's house at Earlshall Park was much bigger than Birtwick Park and more modern. The Earl's daughter, Lady Anne, liked to ride me around the park with her brother or cousins. I enjoyed these rides, which were sometimes with Ginger, and sometimes with another young horse called Lizzie. I was a popular horse with Earl Smythe's wife, as well as his daughter, but Lady Smythe always used me to pull carriages. She liked the latest fashions, and one of these was for horses to use special reins. These kept the horses' heads high in the air all the time while they were pulling the carriages. "How wonderful they look!" the lady said when she saw Ginger and me with our heads held high. But the reins were very uncomfortable, and it was almost impossible to pull the carriage up a hill when you could not put your head down. "If they do not tighten the reins more, I will do what they ask me," said Ginger. "I can see that this is a good home, and that they are good people. But if they tighten them any more, there will be trouble." I did not like these reins at all, but Ginger and I continued to work hard. But every day they tightened the reins a little more. One day we were both in a carriage together. The lady decided that she wanted the reins to hold our heads up even higher. I could see that Ginger was not happy. Before she could tighten the reins, Ginger began to kick so hard that she fell to the ground. I fell too, and we both had to be cut from the carriage as soon as possible. We were both hurt after the fall, and we were taken home. Earl Smythe's helper, York, was angry about the special reins, but there was nothing he could do to stop Lady Smythe's love of fashion. He washed our wounds with hot water, and it took a long time before we recovered. Ginger and I were put in a field to recover, but my knees were badly damaged. We were not well enough to run as we used to do, but we spent a lot of time chatting. Then, one day, the Earl came to see us with York. "I spent good money on these horses," he said, "but if they cannot pull a carriage, we must sell them." "I know a man in Bath who needs a good horse," said York. "He looks after his horses well." "You should write to him, York," said the Earl. "We can still get good money for Black Beauty. I'm not so sure about Ginger." A week later, I was taken away from the field and said a quick goodbye to Ginger. I was taken in a train to the town of Bath. It was my first journey on a train, but the experience was not a bad one. My new owner lived in a small house in the town, and he had many horses. People could hire the horses for a day. This meant that many of them were not good drivers. I was a gentle horse, so my new owner often let bad drivers take me because he knew I would behave well. Some of these riders pulled the reins so hard that it hurt my mouth. Some did not use the reins at all, so that I did not know what to do. Others did not understand that a horse cannot work when it has a stone in its foot. One driver complained that he had hired a bad horse because I could not walk very fast. The stone in my foot was very painful, and it was very difficult for me to get home again. However, there were also good drivers in Bath. One of these liked me so much that he asked my owner if his friend could buy me, and soon I had another new owner. His name was Mr. Barry. He was a businessman who had little exercise, and his doctor advised him to ride a horse to keep him healthy. He had a helper called Filcher to look after me, and bought me the best food he could find. Filcher was good to me, and for a time I was happy. I did not know then that my life was not going to be happy for long. Filcher began to give me less food each week, and I became hungry. I had less energy and started to feel exhausted all the time. When Mr. Barry visited a farmer friend in the country, the friend said, "Your horse does not look the same. Has it been ill?" "No, but Filcher told me that horses often have less energy in the autumn and that it's nothing to worry about," Mr. Barry replied. "That's not true," cried the farmer. "If you buy good food for this horse, then it isn't eating it. Something else is. I suggest that you give this horse some good food for the next few weeks, and I advise you to watch your helper. There are some men who will steal food, even from an animal." Of course, I knew what happened to my food. Filcher put most of it into a basket and took it home. His family kept rabbits, which they sold at the market, and my food was given to them. Mr. Barry called the police after this, and they later arrested Filcher. This experience made Mr. Barry feel bad, and he decided to sell me. I was taken to a market for horses. There were horses there of all shapes and sizes. Some were tall and strong, others were old and sick. It worried me to see some of the horses who looked very thin. Would I be like that one day? I stood with 3 other strong-looking horses, and many people came to look at us. The men who thought about buying me opened my mouth, looked in my eyes, and felt my skin. Many of them saw that my knees were damaged, and some were rough with me. There was one man, however, who felt my legs gently and spoke softly. I liked him and hoped he would buy me. "I think we'll be good for each other," he said. He gave £24, and I had another new owner. Chapter 5. The Life of a Taxi Driver. My new owner gave me food before he rode me for many kilometres towards London. It was getting dark, and the lights were on in the streets when we arrived in the big city. There were streets to the left and streets to the right, and I thought we would never arrive. Finally, however, my owner gave a call, and a door opened in a small house. A woman and 2 children ran out. "Is he gentle, father?" called the girl. "Yes, he's as gentle as you are. Come and say hello," he said. "Let me get him some food and water," said the woman, and I was taken into a comfortable stable. "I think I'll be happy here," I thought. My new owners were called Jerry and Polly, and their children were Harry and Dolly, who were aged 12 and 8. They were all very happy people. Jerry owned a taxi carriage and another horse called Captain. The next day, Captain went out with the taxi carriage in the morning. Then it was my turn in the afternoon. Jerry was a very good driver and was very kind to me. He took me to a wide street where there were big houses and shops filled with food. There were many other taxis stopped outside the shops, waiting for passengers. The other drivers said hello to Jerry, and then came to look at me. "He's too handsome to pull a taxi," said one. "Well," said Jerry, "I'll soon find out, won't I?" Then the owner of the taxi business came over, a tall man called Mr. Grant. He studied me as if he wanted to buy me. Then he said, "He's a good horse. He will do well for you, Jerry." The first few days of pulling a taxi were difficult. I did not find it easy in London. There was so much noise and so many people. It was difficult to find my way between all the other carriages, but in time I began to trust Jerry, and I stopped worrying. At the end of the day, I was given good food and fresh water. Harry always helped to look after me, and worked as hard as a much older boy. And Polly and Dolly also came to see me often. Jerry was the best owner I have had. Jerry was always kind to me, but he was not always happy with his passengers. One day, 2 young men came out of a hotel and called him over. "Hey, taxi driver! We're late for our train. Go as quickly as you can so we can catch the 1 o'clock train. We will give you an extra £1," said one of them. "I will take you, but only at our usual speed," said Jerry. Another taxi driver heard him and called out, "I'll go fast for you." "He won't go fast because he loves his horse." The men laughed and jumped into the other taxi. "I must always think about my horse," said Jerry. "£1 won't help if it makes my horse too tired to take other passengers for the rest of the day." Jerry was a very good driver, and with a light pull of the reins, he drove me carefully among the carriages, horses, people, and taxis that filled the streets, some going one way, some the other. I always felt safe, because I trusted Jerry. Holidays were not common for taxi drivers. Many of the taxi drivers did not own their horses but hired them each day. That meant they had to work very long hours without a rest to get enough money. Some of them were not like Jerry and always had to work for 7 days a week. I felt sorry for both the horses and their drivers. One day, a carriage arrived outside a park where we were waiting to take a family home. The horse that pulled the carriage looked very thin and very old. She had sad eyes which looked at me carefully. "Black Beauty?" she said quietly, and then coughed. It was Ginger. Ginger looked so very different. She told me about her life since we lived at Earlshall Park. First, a wealthy man bought her, but she was not able to run very fast after her fall, and she was soon sold again. She had many new owners, each one paying a little less money for her. Then I was bought by a man who has many horses and hires them to men who need them for taxi carriages, she continued. But I'm not strong enough for this work. The men hit me hard when they want me to go faster. I work every day without any break. You usually kick people who aren't good to you, I reminded her. I'm not strong enough to do that now, she said. Men are always stronger than me. If they can get me to work longer hours for more money, they will. I know life is difficult for them too. They always think about their families before they worry about their horses. At that moment, a man came up to her and began to drive her away. "Goodbye, Black Beauty," she said. "You've always been my best friend." I never saw poor Ginger again. I worked hard for Jerry all year. It was not easy work, but I enjoyed helping people. One day, we saw a poor woman in the street. She was carrying her small son. "Please, sir, how do I get to the hospital? My son's ill, and I do not know London." "It is 5 kilometres," said Jerry. "You cannot carry your son that far. I'll take you. You don't have to pay me." The woman was very pleased, but before she could get into the taxi, 2 men jumped up in front of her. "Take us to Regent Street," called one of them. "This woman is taking the taxi," said Jerry. "Our business is important. We were first in the taxi. She can wait." Jerry looked at the men and then said, "You can stay in the taxi as long as you want. I can wait while you rest yourselves." Then he turned to the poor woman and said, "Don't worry, they'll soon be gone." Jerry was right. Soon the men angrily got out of the taxi and walked off down the road. Jerry then helped the woman into the taxi. We left the woman and her son at the hospital, and as we were leaving, a wealthy-looking woman called us over. "Jerry Barker? Is it you? I'm pleased to find you here, because it's difficult to find a taxi in this part of London." Chapter 6. my final home. Jerry knew the woman, Mrs. Fowler, who was always very kind. When we arrived outside her house, she said to Jerry, "If ever you have any problems, tell me. I can always find work for a good driver, and I know you are one of the best." There were problems in Jerry's life. Winter came, and soon there was a holiday for New Year. However, there was no holiday for the taxi drivers. We had a lot of work to do, taking people from house to house. One evening, Jerry was asked to take home a rich man from a large house in the west of London. He was asked to wait outside the house until the man was ready. It was very cold, and there was snow in the air. We waited for more than an hour before the man finally came outside. He did not apologize and was angry when he had to give Jerry money for the time he waited outside in the street. This man changed our lives forever. When we finally arrived home that night, I was very cold and tired, but Jerry was worse. He coughed all the time. The next day, Harry came to feed me, but I was not put in the carriage. The same happened for 2 more days. I knew Jerry was very ill. Jerry slowly recovered, but the doctor told him not to drive taxis anymore if he wanted to stay healthy. So, Polly wrote to Mrs. Fowler and asked if she had any work for Jerry. A few days later, Mrs. Fowler wrote back. She wanted Jerry to work for her and said that the family could move to a small cottage near her house. This was very good news for the family, but bad news for me. I knew that they would sell me, and I was becoming old. Would I ever have such a happy home again? I was sold to another taxi driver called Skinner. I am sure that this was the same man who made Ginger so weak and sad. We worked 7 days a week, and I never had a good rest or enough to eat. One day we waited outside a station for a train to arrive. A family of 4 asked Skinner to take them home with all their luggage. The daughter peered at me and said, "I don't think this poor horse can carry us and all our bags. He looks very weak."
"He'll be fine," cried Skinner. "Don't worry about him."
I tried to pull the carriage as fast as I could, but I was weak because I was given no breakfast. I wanted to go quickly, but when we started to climb a hill, I knew that I did not have enough energy. I thought that I could not breathe, and suddenly fell onto the ground. I could not move, and I was sure that I was going to die. After some time, someone gave me water, and I slowly stood up. I was taken inside and given some food. A vet came to look at me and told Skinner that I needed good food and rest. But Skinner said that I was no good if I couldn't work. He decided to sell me. When I was well enough to travel, I was taken to another market for horses outside London. Once again, I was with horses of all ages and sizes. This time I was put with the horses that were old or ill-looking. I did not think anyone would want to buy me now. The people who looked at me were also very poor and wanted to buy a horse for as little money as possible. However, not all of the men were poor. An old farmer with a kind face and his grandson stopped to look at me. "This one looks kind and intelligent," said the boy. "Can we buy him?"
"He's old," said the farmer. "I'm sure he used to be a good horse, but there's not much he can do now."
"He's not as old as he looks," said the man who took me to the market. "He was used for driving taxis and became ill. With a little rest, he'll be a good horse again." The farmer thought for a time, then decided to buy me. His grandson was delighted. My new owner was called Mr. Thorogood. He took me to a large field, and I was given good food every day. The grandson, Willie, looked after me very well. When spring came, I felt strong again, and they let me pull a small carriage.
"I'm pleased we bought this one," said Mr. Thorogood. "He's a good horse, and not old at all."
The old farmer wanted to find me a place where I could work, and took me to the home of Miss Bloomfield. She lived with her 2 sisters. "We need a new horse," she said, "but this one does not look very well. Look at his knees."
"He has had a difficult past, I'm sure," said the farmer. "But you won't find a better horse than this. Try him. If you don't like him, I'll take him back."
In the morning, a young man came to take me to their home. He looked at me. "He has a white foot and a white star on his forehead, like Black Beauty," he said, "and healthy again." So here my story ends.